I'm Bill McShea. I'm a wildlife ecologist. Peter was talking about the future. My job is to talk about the past. I'm like the ghost of Christmas past. I'll be here almost 40 years. So Peter said, could you please cover the last 40 years? And you have 10 minutes. So I decided I can't do that. But what I can do is talk about myself. I can always talk about myself. But I can talk about how my science has transformed over the last 40 years to be more the conservation science that the center wants to be doing. So we're going to go through that process here of me. And I'm sorry for all the people I'm skipping. I'm sorry for all the things we're not talking about. I'm going to concentrate on the ecology here at the center. So I came here to study the star-nosed mole. There's the mole, and that's me. And it was totally for animal programs. Ed Gould wanted to have star-nosed mole display it downtown. Wanted someone to come who could keep those things alive in captivity and could study those rays. I agreed to do it. I could have been downtown. I could have been here. It was an animal program project. While I was doing this project, the center was wrapped up in this crisis of deer management. The deer were eating all our hay. We actually had a congressional meeting where they just lambasted Chris Wemmer on why you're trying to shoot the deer. Can't you do something about this rather than shooting them? And we started a deer ecology program, pretty much to understand why we have so many deer, where the deer are coming from, how can we manage these deer. It was focused on land management with respect to hay production. The big function of this center is still hay production. And at that time, it was, what are we going to do about the deer? So we were collaring deer, capturing deer, driving deer. It was a lot of fun. And I went away from the mole and started doing more deer stuff than I was doing mole stuff. Then we got a research coordinator, John Rapole, here in the corner, and he said, I don't care so much about deer. What else can you do? And I said, well, I can do rodents. I don't care about rodents. Well, I can do birds. Oh, I love birds. So we started a project that combined deer and birds and rodents and acorns, and it became a trophic interaction, food webs. For more than 15 years, we did quite extensive studies here in the center on how these animals all interact with each other. So while we're trying to manage the deer, how managing the deer impacts the migratory birds, how it impacts the rodents. Well, we actually found that predators were switching between the rodents and the birds depending on the acorn production the year before. And the acorn production depended on how many acorns were being eaten by the deer. So all that was related. It was a great study. I really, really enjoyed it, but it took us beyond looking at individual animals for management reasons to looking at ecosystems and the interactions between species. While that was going on, Chris Wemmer said, hey, we have an opportunity to work in Myanmar. And we have a deer here at the center, Eld's deer, and they have a deer in Myanmar that's having problems. Do we have anybody here who's a deer expert? And I said, hey, that's me. Okay, let's go to Myanmar and let's look at the deer there and let's see if anything there relates to our captive management and is anything that that we learn from the captive management relative to the deer in Myanmar. So we're still connected with animal programs, but we're getting more outside the center and more toward an international focus. And several things happened. That was a seminal project for the center in that Chris Wemmer, it was an all hands on board. You may recognize a couple of those pictures there, but we brought probably 15 different people from here out to Myanmar to study different aspects of this problem. We went from one researcher doing one project to really collaboration at a much larger scale we brought out geneticists and plant people and small mammal people, and we created an entire team. Because what we found out is that this wasn't really a deer problem, it was a people problem. And we had to find a way to engage the people, the local people in Myanmar around this one Chatin wildlife sanctuary. We built houses for those people. We set up camps for them. We made a plant team. We made a bird team. We made a deer team. We engaged the community in all these different activities. We supplemented the patrolling teams. We had to engage the community in order to conserve these deer. And it's, at the meantime, we said, well, let's do the trophic interactions. Let's look how these deer are interacting with the environment. And it became very similar to the situation here. These deer, the Eld's deer down there in the bottom, were dependent on this forest called Indang Forest. That Indang Forest was dependent on fire. You had to catch that forest on fire every year or the forest would decline. So it had to be burned. And the reason it had to be burned is because it generated all these grasses following the burn, and the deer needed those grasses. So you had to have the forest, you had to burn it, and the deer exploited those grasses that came up. The problem is that people messed up with that cycle. People removed the trees, people put their cattle in there to eat the grasses, and those human-wildlife conflicts broke that cycle that we were finding in that location. But it was a fascinating thing, and we spent a good 10 years there looking at this study of the people, the animals, and the forest. You can't talk about conservation here without talking about giant pandas. You know, we're all giant panda obsessed here at the zoo. And I want to give a shout out here to Dave Wilt in that we had captive pandas since the 1980s, but we were unable to get into the reserves in China until Dave Wilt and Joe Gale Howard opened up that whole situation by going around with their biomedical survey. Their biomedical survey of captive pandas got us access to a lot of reserves, a lot of connections, and we used those connections to start activity on the ecology of the giant pandas. And I would say that Eld's deer, none of you people know about Eld's deer. It's a very low profile animal, but giant pandas, now we're into politics. Now we're into high profile animals. We're into the government involvement. It's a much bigger situation for us to be in. And it was an important something for us to get involved with. So the way we started there was training courses. Melissa, myself, others offered training courses. And a lot of this, we should give a shout out to Rudy Rudran. He was already doing wildlife management courses throughout Asia, and we could modify the courses that he was doing, the network that he created, in order to tailor it for the needs of the Chinese community. And their needs were technology. They loved technology. If we could bring technology to their wildlife science, that's what they wanted. So we had a ton of courses. I think we trained in all of the reserves, all the giant panda reserves over the course of time, both in laboratory techniques and in field work. We used that training to start research projects. So like that's Barb Wolf up there in the corner, putting down a takin. So we can put a radio collar on that takin, and we're doing takin ecology. We're collecting fecal samples to do hormone surveys for Asiatic black bears. We're doing interviews with people around the reserves on why do they kill bears or why do they not kill bears. All of that was technology that was brought into the situation in order to make this suitable for the Chinese. I'm a camera trap guy. I know we're obsessed about giant pandas, but there's a whole supporting cast around in these panda reserves. They don't only contain pandas, they contain a lot of wildlife. And we can use that wildlife to understand how well they're managing these panda reserves. So just a couple studies. There's a study on the left here using the camera trap data to look at the retention of 4 large carnivores in the giant panda reserves, where there's still these carnivores and where these carnivores are missing. Sadly, those giant panda reserves are not doing a good job with carnivores. Most of the large carnivores are disappearing because those panda reserves are not big enough for those carnivores. The other study was looking at corridors between reserves, using the camera traps to who's in those corridors, what animals are using them. Are all the corridors good for all animals, or are they just good for giant pandas? And it's just an example of things we can do based on our training courses. I've taken that now and I use that in the lessons I learned there and use that in all of my research right now. We have this, Peter mentioned this Snapshot USA thing. This is a continental scale thing where we're trapping in all 50 states. It's all by volunteers. Everyone is putting their cameras out at the same time in the same way in order to share the data. And we all use that data for conservation. So that's a project that really builds off of what we learned in Myanmar and China. And we have had the opportunity to set up new programs. And we're starting out these new programs using everything we learned before. So we're starting out these programs with science, grassland science. We're starting it out with community engagement, talking to the stakeholders, the ranchers, the Native Americans who are living in this area. How are they using wildlife? And then we're still connected with the animal programs in our reintroducing bison, swift fox, black-footed ferret. All of that brings everything we have together. So what have I learned over this time? I've learned that conservation takes a long time, and it has to happen at large spatial scales. My original master's was on a 1 hectare plot. I haven't worked on a 1 hectare plot in a long time. We have to involve research teams that come with all different kinds of expertise. We have to engage the local people, or what we're doing is essentially useless. And I tell my people all the time, conservation is a team sport. It's no longer any good for you to go and look at your little mole in the corner of the woods. I miss my moles, but that's not doing us much good as far as conservation go. So these are the lessons I've learned over this 40 years, and I think it fits well with the kind of conservation science you're going to hear from now. Now all our speakers are going to talk about what are we doing today rather than what we were doing 30, 40 years ago. So let's move on to our next talk. You're ready.